Weekend Breakfast with Penny Smith on Talk Radio.
The time is 8:15. We're going to talk about people living in high-rise buildings with cladding, essentially similar to that at Grenfell, which, of course, that tragedy happened now. My goodness, that's almost 3 years ago, and people are still living in these sort of buildings. We've got the Manchester Cladiators is a campaign group, and they're talking about it, and also Andy Burnham, who is the Mayor of Manchester. And if I can come to you first of all, Anastasia, tell me about the problem then at the moment.
Hello, so my name is Anastasia and I live in a block of flats in Manchester, and a few years ago we bought our flat and then we found out there's some issues with cladding. So our building is covered with wood cladding on both sides, and also there's a separate issue with our fire alarm having not passed the latest regulations.
Right, so the cladding though it's not the same as that at Grenfell though?
No, it's not the same as the one in Grenfell. So at the moment, there's no financial support for us to remedy the situation.
Right, and when you say remedy the situation, has it been declared a problem by the fire service, for example? Has it been recommended to take the cladding down?
Yes, it has. They have said that we need to take the cladding down, and at the minute, the building owner is saying that it's down to the leaseholders to pay for that.
In the meantime, how are you continuing to live in these flats? What's life like there?
It's pretty stressful. It doesn't feel safe. And at the minute, in December, they brought a new thing with a walking watchman. So there's 5 men patrolling 2 buildings 24 hours a day, which at some point we're being told we're going to have to pay for as well.
And have they suggested how much you're going to have to pay for this?
Not at the minute, but in other buildings in Manchester, people have had up to a 400% increase in their service charges because of this.
That's quite a lot. So,
yeah.
So what have you been doing then? Because you're a member of this, the Manchester Cladiators. What are you trying to do?
So I've joined the Manchester Cladiators fairly recently, and they're a very proactive group of residents who've been campaigning really nationwide and asking the government to step in and take some responsibility. And they've also been working closely with Andy Burnham and just trying to get some support for ourselves, really, in publicity.
Who do you think should foot the bill? You say the government, you know, you're working with the government, or at least trying to get the government to work with you. But presumably if the government deals with it, it's going to be everyone, taxpayers, paying for it. So who should foot the bill?
I mean, that's a difficult question to answer, but I think we need to find out why these buildings were built this way in the first place and why they were passed off and signed by the council, and now all of a sudden they're deemed unsafe, and it doesn't seem fair for us as leaseholders to have to pay for that.
How's it affecting your mental health? Because obviously this has been happening now, as I said, for essentially 2.5 years.
It's just increased anxiety and uncertainty about what's going to happen. And then obviously the financial pressures are great, and we're not able to sell our flat at the moment. So we're not really able to leave the situation if we wanted to. So we do feel stuck.
How high up in this tower are you?
I'm on the 3rd floor, and our building is just about 18 meters, which is classed as high rise.
Mm-hmm. And how, I presume you talk to other people in the building. The higher up you go, presumably the more worried people are.
Yeah, they've changed the fire system now, so there's a get out. So if there is a fire, everyone has to get out rather than stay put. Mm-hmm. But we haven't practiced, and also our management company hasn't met with us, so the communication's been quite poor all over.
And meanwhile, in the meantime, have all the residents, do you all have, I don't know, fire extinguishers, fire blankets, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I can't speak for everyone, but my husband and I have made some provisions in terms of safety. Yeah.
Well, Anastasia, thank you very much for chatting to us this morning. Andy Burnham is the Mayor of Manchester. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What do you want to happen? What do you think should happen in these sort of circumstances?
I think there's only one solution, and that is the government has to step in to resolve this. This situation is beyond the means of the residents affected, and it needs the government to order that the cladding, all types of it actually, be removed immediately, and then do a deal with the industry, the property industry, to pay for it, because there's probably a shared responsibility here. Government, because of regulatory failures in the past, industry, perhaps that they didn't follow some of the guidance correctly. So that's what needs to happen. It needs to be taken away from the residents. That it's no fault of theirs that they're in flats and apartments that are not deemed to be fire safe. And this needs to be sorted without leaving them in this dreadful limbo that they've been trapped in for months now.
Hi, Andy, it's Rhea here. The thing that I find fascinating about this is if you buy a product in a shop and it's then recalled, it's not you, the customer, that's responsible for paying for that, despite the regulation that might have meant that product at the time of sale was considered safe. Why is there any concern? Why is there any delay here? Surely it should just be the developer's responsibility to solve this, and that's that.
I couldn't put it better, Ray. You've said it perfectly. I mean, when you buy a flat, you just assume, don't you, that all the necessary checks were done properly and that the rules were in place. I think this is the problem. The government deems the only faulty product to be the Grenfell style cladding, or what's called ACM cladding. So they paid for the removal of that. But your listeners may remember a fire in Bolton late last year, at the building called the Cube, where the fire literally ripped up the side and the cladding melted. Now, that was a different type of cladding, high-pressure laminate, it's called. But is anybody saying that wasn't a Grenfell-style situation? It was a bit of a miracle, actually, that nobody was hurt or worse on that night. But that is the problem. The government has restricted it to ACM cladding, and it's not accepted that there are many other buildings that are in this position of not being safe, and they're not accepting the return of those products, if I can put it in that way. They've only dealt with a small part of the problem so far.
Is it essentially, should we not have any cladding at all? What is the point of cladding, by the way?
I think it's to make buildings look nicer, isn't it? Or, I mean, I'm not entirely sure of whether it offers some protective benefit to the brickwork or whatever. The building in Bolton, it was a real surprise to see. It was just fiberglass beneath the cladding and a wooden frame. It really, I mean, it was quite shocking when you saw what was behind. Maybe it's a cheap way of making buildings look smart. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of questions have to be asked actually about why it is used.
And also why it's signed off. I mean, that's the other question, is why were these things signed off?
I think what happened was there was a weakening of the regulatory process, and the fire service that used to have quite a big role in signing off buildings had that role diminished. So the argument I'm making is this is down to national government, effectively, under governments of all colours actually. They've weakened the rules over the years and have therefore allowed buildings to be put up that aren't safe. And the reality is now you've got thousands of people, particularly in the big cities, Manchester, Birmingham, London, who are trapped in buildings where they're worrying every day, not just about the fire risk, but also their finances, because they're paying extra money for measures to keep them safe in the interim. It's like a living nightmare for people. It's like a perfect storm of stress. And they just can't be left there because it's damaging their mental health. If we knew of another issue that was damaging the mental health of thousands of people, the NHS would step in and sort it. This is damaging the mental health of thousands of people, and it's only the government now that can step in and resolve it. With
such a push on building new homes, and many of those homes in cities like London, Manchester, Birmingham are high-rise, how much do we know about whether cladding that is potentially dangerous is still being used on these buildings?
I think there is some evidence that continues to be used because of the government's focus on ACM cladding. That's the problem. They've only accepted that one type of cladding poses the risks. But as I say again, we've seen other buildings where that has also the cladding of a different type has caused the risk. And it's not like it's a threat that's unlikely to come true. There was a fire in Salford on Thursday night where it caught fire, and it actually had the ACM cladding still on. So these are serious issues, and the government can't ignore them. It really can't. And it does feel a little as though they've just left residents trapped in this limbo. I just don't think that's acceptable.
Yeah, and I suppose the only other thing to say is that at least the more we talk about these sort of things, the more that people can actually, when they go to a building which they suspect is clad, because sometimes I presume you can't even tell that they're necessarily clad with anything. They might just look like they're not clad, but they are. Is that actually it's the sort of thing that you need to ask before if you're going to go and buy. I mean, it's such a massive thing to buy a flat or a home, to actually say, is this, and if so, not interested. And then that at least might make the developers think twice.
Well, but many of the homes are valueless at the moment. The ones that have been inspected by various fire services around the country, many of them have lost value completely. But yes, people will ask those questions, but in some ways, why should they? I mean, how are we to know?
No, I know. I'm just saying that the more we talk about it, as I said, the only way sometimes to stop people doing something is to keep on sort of saying, here we are, we're drawing attention to this, and if you carry on doing this, then, you build those things, but nobody will live in them.
Yeah. But, many of the companies who built these things, the last couple of decades, they made a lot of money, haven't they, out of those buildings, often built to pretty poor standards. But now they're nowhere to be seen, aren't they, leaving the residents trying to fight to regain their safety and their peace of mind. And, that's why I say it's the government that's got to bang heads together with the property industry. The two of them have got to come up with a solution. And the budget is the perfect time to do it. So we're going to be making that call on the government on Tuesday. We've got a national lobby of Parliament together with the City Mayor of Salford and hopefully other cities. We're going to be in Westminster with residents affected, and we're grateful for you putting this issue on air this morning. It affects a minority of people in this country, but I think everybody would relate to the terrible situation that they're in, and they need support. They do need our support. You're in a home, the value of it has been wiped away. You're worried about the fires that might happen every single day, and you're paying a massive extra bill every month for the safety measures being put in place in the interim. Imagine being trapped in that kind of situation. It's a nightmare through no fault of their own, and it needs to be sorted out.
Thank you very much. That's Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Manchester. The time is coming up to 8:30.